This is a hard act to follow. I have been on committees with Antonia in the past, and I know what she is doing. So this is a privilege and an honor. Thank you for asking me to speak today and just share some of my thoughts on this special International Women's Day. And to Fartun, I would be remiss without thanking Fartun for always making sure to advocate for all things women and BIPOC, regardless of the cost. She takes risks and we learn a lot from each other. And sometimes we fuss, but that's okay too. That's how we learn. So I wanted to just share a few words with you today regarding equity. When I asked Fartun, what do you want me to talk about? She said, make it your own. I trust you. And I said, okay, I'm going to talk about equity, something that is near and dear to me and what I do as a woman and as a professional. And when I really thought about this, something came to mind that I wanted to share with you. And that's that equity today is more than a buzzword. There are many of us on this phone that grew up when equity was a buzzword. It's more than that now, but unfortunately, it's still a long, hard fight in the community and in the world. So I always like to get myself grounded on what equity really means. So I have a couple of definitions. The quality of being fair and impartial is what Webster says. But I like the policy link definition, which I adopt in many of the work that I do, which is just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. And what I love about that definition is that it's aspirational. It's important that people reach their full potential and prosper. Now, I know that it's important for equity, and all of you know that as well. And it's important because everyone, if barriers are removed, can reach their full potential and contribute without systemic racism and all the other isms that we have in our society and prosper. But to get there is hard. As BIPOC people and women, we must embrace equity and be willing to flex and sometimes change. Now, not change to be complementary to the majority community, but to each other. Let's face it, we were raised in the very system and in the very society that was meant for us not to thrive, let alone prosper. A system that is filled with systemic racism. The very systems themselves are okay. If we followed the law as it is written, if we followed the Constitution as it is written, with a few tweaks and updates, they're decent. What's not decent is the consistency and fairly managed part of the very systems that we have. When we then put in some other things, unconscious, and we know fully conscious biases that are in place by leaders and others to keep us right where we are. We heard stories today, Sonia's mom was told that she could not be a lawyer because she was Black. Those are stories that we still hear today, that we cannot do things. So the unconscious and fully conscious biases that are in our life play a huge role. And then a country that has a historical past that plays a very important role in the present day. From long ago, when slavery, lynching, and Jim Crow laws existed, to today, where police brutality, racial profiling, and simply standing up, or should I say kneeling, for what is right is viewed in the most negative manner possible. Just today, the trial for Derek Chauvin starts. And we know that this is something that could have happened long ago. Thank God for a phone, and a phone that captured every second of the horrific murder. And now we're going to trial. But this is interesting because people see exactly what they want to see. And the fact that some don't want to see the history even taught in school is a way to just say, it didn't occur, is a way to just say, get over it, is a way to just say, well, I didn't own any slaves, so why are you stuck back on what slavery means? But ladies and gentlemen, the road is long and hard, but we must keep working. And we all have a part in this change that we know needs to happen. And for me, I look at things kind of generationally, racially, and then personally. What do I need to change in my life to make it better? What do I need to change as a Black woman to make it better? And then what do I need to say and change as a 50-plus-year-old woman in this society? So generationally, what does that mean? And when I talk about generations, because I know a lot of people, it's really important for me to tell people that it's a place for everyone to get involved. Now, we must understand the role, and the role changes sometimes depending on where we are in life. But very, very important is that everyone has that role to play. For me, when I was in school at Howard University, and I have to say I'm a proud Howard University alum, I participated in the March on Washington to make Martin Luther King Day a holiday. And I didn't know then what I know now, but we all benefit from that. And there was a time and a place. I have a banner where I'm holding my sign with my sorority sisters, and we are marching for what we didn't really know was one of the more important holidays for me in my life. And I lived to see that and benefit from it. But now I don't do as much marching. I advocate more with my voice on the boards and organizations that I belong to and in my workplace. Each and every time, even when, and I talk about Fortuna a lot about risk, even when it's risky, it's important to me to not just be at the table, but work at the table and sit at the table and educate at the table and call in at the table and lean in at the table. It's important that when you get to the table, that you don't just sit there and relax, but that you advocate and work hard for the things that you stand for. From a racial perspective, this is a tough one that takes a lot of time. We heard the stories already today. We as African Americans were raised in the very system that has kept us oppressed. We are so accustomed to being the only, especially in Minnesota, but not just in Minnesota, in this country. Many of us were the only people that once we make it, we assume that we're fine. We have to work hard as people to pull others up with us. I have so many peers that are like, well, you were the first Black vice president of fundraising at Mitchell Hamlin. And I said, but I shouldn't have been. What took so long? Why are we doing that? And to still be the first and the only in 2021 is a problem. And so we are accustomed to it, accustomed to being alone, accustomed to being the only, but we must pull and bring others with us, not behind us, not set the path, but bring them in with us. And I worked with a young lady at United Way that literally changed my life. And I won't say her name because I know many of you know her. But the one thing that she always taught me was be a lifelong learner. And I said I was a lifelong learner, but she taught me how to live it. And she said, just because you didn't get it doesn't mean that we shouldn't get it. And I'll never, ever forget that. There is room for all of us to make it and prosper. And there's enough for all of us to go around. So we have to work together to make a difference. And then personally, I often tell folks that equity and systemic racism cannot be fought from 9 to 5. it is a lifelong journey. It's a 24-hour journey. And for some of us that live it every day, we know that. And lately, I've been saying, especially since 2016, which was a pretty monumental time in my life, and I'm sure many of yours, that we can't be better people to change this world if we're not good neighbors. So I decided, I live in Eden Prairie, that I was going to be a better neighbor. At that point, I had been here for quite a while and didn't really know my neighbors, and quite candidly didn't care to. So I decided that I'm going to be a better neighbor, because what better place than to be in a majority community that I could help people understand and they could help me understand. So I started that year, that 2017, I decided to just be friends with people and wave and say hi. And that holiday season, I decided to host a happy hour. And at that point, I had been here, I think it was 12 years. Same house, 12 years. And I had about 10 women in my house. They had never been here. My next door neighbor had been here 8 years. I had never physically met her. And to tell you, fast forward that, even through the pandemic, we are doing things together. We held driveway parties on election night. Someone just asked me this weekend to start a community garden. And I say that not to brag, but to say we've had some tough conversations. We talked through the George Floyd murder when they couldn't understand, well, why are you looting? And I said, don't get it distracted. There would be no looting if there was no murder. To the point that they actually started understanding and saying, I get it now. And I even had to say, we learned it from you. Go back in history where you put hoses on us. You sick dogs on us. We learned it from you, but how do we change it? And we're doing that together. Someone I personally admire, Professor Ibram Kendi, discusses anti-racist behavior. And he talks about denial and confession. And I talk a lot about acknowledgement. You can't change something that you don't acknowledge exists. So in many of our communities, we're at the denial stage. If I just don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. But we have to confess that it actually did exist. And then how do we work together to change it? And we must say there is a problem and actually deal with it. One thing about Minnesota that I've learned, and this is the longest place I've ever lived in my life, based on where I've worked. My parents moved from Savannah, Georgia to New York when I was 8. So that probably explains why I talk a lot about things, because I was raised on the East Coast. But one of the things about Minnesota being a very liberal state is that many of our white liberals and allies never lived or worked with anyone of color until very recently. So even though they think that they are on our side and their heart is, some of their actions aren't always. So we really, really have to know who our allies are, but we all must realize that our intent and our impact must match our actions. And that's very, very difficult for many people. So again, being at that table allows me to respectfully point those things out that we're doing and give examples so that people can see them. So given that the road truly is long and the journey is indeed real, there are a few things that I would recommend that we do, that we can do every day to try to make equity a reality for everyone, so everyone can prosper. And part of that is educating people. So we have to expand our circle. It does me no good to be in a circle where everybody thinks like me, looks like me, and most importantly, agrees with everything I say, because then I'm not learning. I've only been at Mitchell Hamlin for 3 months, and I tell people that I want people that are for the strategy changes and against the strategy changes to be in the room so we can learn and move together. Educate in your own way, and do not forget to listen. This is really, really important. When we're passionate about something, and especially when we believe and know that we're right, we have to realize that not everyone is there with us. So we have to listen so that we can learn what to say to bring people along this path with us. I often talk about building a house, and you need multiple tools in your toolkit to build the house. If the only tool you have in your toolkit of equity is a hammer, your equity house is not going to be built. You need a hammer sometimes, and you need a screwdriver sometimes, and you need some nails sometimes. You need all of it in order to make sure that the house and the foundation are built on solid ground. So some people might say you get more with honey than you can with vinegar. That's an old saying, but we have to make sure that we use multiple things in order to educate people and bring them along. Now, when you expand your circle to include more than people who are just like you, you learn, and so do they. They learn. I had a conversation with Fartun just yesterday, and she said, "Why do you say that? That's not true." And I had to remember that, you know what? Just because it was one person's truth does not mean it was everybody's truth. We often say, I do not speak for every African American woman in the country. It's my experience. But I had to learn that. And thank God that Fartun is brave enough to tell me that is not true. And now I know I have to say that gently. It's still the truth of the person that told me. However, it's not everybody's truth. And we have to remember that in our circle. Do your research. Make sure as you're continuing to learn, continuing to understand new and different people, young and old people, do your research, because the information that you hear is not always everyone's truth. And then remember that it literally takes a ton of time to do this, and that it's a journey. And I tell people all the time, fine, because we know in the workplace, often people say, well, you have to meet people where they are, and not everybody is going to move along at the same time. And I said, yep, but that's what a journey is. And you don't get to stay there. You must move and learn and grow. So when I think about what could we do, again, it's how do we start having discussions to learn with and from each other so that we can work together for the good. And we can do this, but we must do it together. So I just wanted to make sure that I shared just a few words so that we can have a clear understanding of my views and my truth. But know that on this International Women's Day, it's just important that we listen to each other, that we talk to each other, that we share stories so that people can see themselves in the future and we can all do it together. So I thank you all for listening with me. And then if anyone has any questions or comments that I can answer, I'd be happy to do that.
I'll invite anybody to throw any questions into the chat. I just want to share that in the chat, Fartun says, we love you, Leslie. And thank you for letting us lean on you. And Dr. Antonia says, thank you for a timely address, wise words.
What can we say, Leslie? You've covered everything that needs to be covered with so calm and so poised. So we're grateful for your leadership, and we know we can lean on you and vice versa. And remember, we need to talk about self-care and how we need to take care of ourselves as well.
And that's self-care is so important when we do this. And there are many people that think, well, self-care is just for them or they. But self-care is how you need to take care of yourself. It's not what other people feel or do. It could just be during the pandemic, I'll be honest, I've walked a ton because I was confined to my house. And now for the 2 weeks that no one could go outside because we were, frigid, I really missed being outside. During the election season, which seemed like forever ago, I had every shirt and that's how I advertised, but I was walking and I got to know my neighbors and, they said, we can do this. And I got to know the ones that didn't want to do that either, trust me. So it's just important, but getting your nails done, getting your hair done, getting just rest and relaxation and yoga, exercise, especially as you get older. It is just so important to take care of yourself. I fuss with Fartoon. Don't take on everything. You can't take on everything all the time. And that's hard. And it's hard for many of you. And I know it's hard for her. It's hard for me too. But I learned how to say no. I learned the hard way because I couldn't do it all. So it's self-care comes in the form that you need it to be. But take care of yourself and allow some time to wind down because this is heavy stuff. And this is stuff that weighs on you at the end of the day. So self-care is really, really critical.
Leslie, we have some other people coming in saying amazing, amazing, and thank you so much for all that you've shared with us. And
Oh,
Liz
thank you.
Shanklin says, thank you, Leslie, for talking about self-care.
Thank you.
We have one other question from an attendee. How else can we sustain ourselves through this trial as Black folks? Do you have any recommendations on how we can deal with trauma responses, lashing out?
Yes. And this is something that I need to
Thank
do.
you very much. So
Oh, she was, sorry, Hanan, she's gonna answer that one question real quick.
I think this is something that I needed to do. When Yahoo was putting the comments in all of the articles, I was the one that read all the comments. In Twitter, I go and read the replies. I would say don't do that because you really start to know the true meaning of what people are feeling. And it's a cowardly way to do things. But in terms of the trial, know when you need to shut down because it could be overwhelming at times. So that's when that self-care piece and practice meditation really have to come into play. If I know that some of the outcomes are clearly going in the wrong direction, I don't look at the news. I don't go on Yahoo. I try to remove myself because I know that it will upset me. And then I find a time when I've calmed down a little bit to go back in. So allow time to breathe, allow time to just kind of decompress because the results are going to be there when you pop back in. And to lash out is not going to help the situation get better. But there are times when we have to do that. I think some of the civil unrest last year taught us that there was a time and a place, but I don't know if I would say that's going to be the first thing that I would do, especially at my age. But there are other people that believe that will work. But I say just remove yourself, take some time and breathe. And then in that circle of believers, of you, whatever circle you have, make sure that you have that same circle to go back and be a resource for you to bounce things off, to see how they feel, to see what their perspective is. And social media sometimes isn't always your friend. So know when to shut it down.